Пожалуйста, приветствуем Майкла Битцела, который расскажет нам, инди-разработчикам, то,
Hello. This is the worst title I've ever come up with for a presentation. I'll apologize in advance because I'm a bit sick, so my voice is probably going to go about halfway through. I'm also really freaked out by the idea of being translated. I've never had that happen before, and that seems like a lot of power in someone else's hands. If I annoy them, will they do a silly voice? I'm not sure, and it scares me. But yeah, so who am I? Well, that was a great introduction. I made Thomas Was Alone, which was a little platforming game, friendship and jumping and feelings and stuff like that. Last year I made a game called Volume, which is a stealth game, which is doing pretty well in Russia, actually, weirdly. We'll come back to that. And before that, kind of worked in a lot of studios and places, kind of all over the shop. Now, I always do a little bit of a talk before every talk, which is where I kind of challenge the idea of conferences in general, which is always a really strong way to start an hour-long presentation, because there is this problem with the way that we talk at these conferences, the way people come up on stage and talk about things that have been successful or things that have worked. And that is because we tend to listen to people at conferences. You know, you see someone on stage who's had some degree of success or some degree of fame on some level with their game, and we assume that person must be really clever, like super smart. And that's a flawed way of looking at things, because obviously there's a survivor's bias. Obviously we assume that people who've had success have done so entirely through intelligence and awareness of the industry. Also, the information that the person's saying is probably out of date. Thomas Was Alone came out in 2012. It's a very different time across the world. Volume came out a year ago. Even then, the industry and the games world in general was very different. Doesn't that undermine this talk? Yes, it does. Slide that I put in there to insult myself 5 minutes into the presentation. It does undermine the talk. It undermines all talks. But I actually think in a way it supports and helps a talk, because you actually listen to the stuff that's being said with that in mind, and it can be really useful. And with this, I'm trying to talk about things that I think are interesting or that I've learned from. But please take it in the context of just one idiot on a stage wearing a cool microphone. Yes, thank you. So the first point is being where I'm doing this kind of Steve Jobs walk. Is that working? I'm not sure. I'm going to go back over here because it feels incredibly arrogant. Being where nobody else is. Actually, no, I'm going to keep doing it. It's fun. So historically, if you look at what has succeeded and what's been a hit, it's usually something that's come out of nowhere. It's something that's come out of a place where no one else is, or, a very empty space, which is in itself weird, right? Compared to how we talk at conferences, we talk about trends and about kind of big pushes in the industry, things that are exciting and cool and new. But that's not usually where the big successes come from. And I can understand the instinct, you want to be where all the cool stuff is, the money's there often, the investment, the audience are excited, something like VR. Super interesting. I'm making a couple of VR games right now, and it is really fun. VR's amazing. But everyone's making a couple of VR games right now. And that could be a problem, right? Because so far there aren't many people playing VR games. So that's interesting. There's a crowding around, and you see it in genre as well. You see it with MOBAs, with survival shooters, games which kind of follow up on a successful game. And it kind of hasn't worked historically. You look at something like World of Warcraft, where for many years, everything had to be an MMO. There was no future of games except for MMOs. Except the problem was that every game that came out that was trying to be Warcraft wasn't Warcraft, and that annoyed everyone. And we see that loop happening over and over again. So generally, the people I'm seeing being successful right now are the people who are ignoring trends and the big pushes in the industry. They're doing their own thing. Now, the one caveat to that is obviously that's not a license to always do really stupid things. There's not an audience crying out for a game, for a platform that came out 10 years ago. There's not an audience crying out for a stupid, boring game, obviously. But being something different and being something that actually exists outside of whatever's trending and popular right now, that can sometimes work. That can be a risk worth taking. The next point is other people. This is something that I see a lot about how indie games are described. So one thing that's often said about me is that I made Thomas Was Alone on my own. And you see this narrative playing out in the media, the idea of the lone developer, the one genius sat at their computer making a game all on their own, and they're awesome, and they're kind of a ninja. But I don't think it's ever actually existed. That's my theory with this. I don't think that's ever actually happened. Generally, when you look into these stories, it's not just one person, it's a bunch of people. Usually it's one arrogant, talky person on Twitter, and then lots of other people actually doing the work as well. Thomas Was Alone, yes, I developed that game on my own, but there was a composer, there was an artist helping with the color palettes, there was Danny who did the voiceover, so there were all these other people helping, and without those people, the game wouldn't have been awesome. The great thing about collaborators is they fill gaps in your skill set. No one can do everything. So identifying the things you're bad at and then finding people to work with who are better at those things is awesome, because ultimately we all just want to make great games, right? And that allows us to do that by bringing in people who are brilliant. There's lots of different kinds of people. There's experienced people, these people who've been making games for like 20 years and are just like absolutely brilliant. I'm working with a few right now. They don't need as much help or advice. They don't need as much hand-holding or looking after. They tend to get on with it, which is really cool. But they cost a lot. Then there's the, super inexperienced people who are really eager, really interested to work in games, and don't yet know all the things they're not actually meant to be doing. And that's cool. You have to look after those people, because often, they will work too hard and they'll burn out and they won't look after themselves. You have a responsibility to make sure that they're treated well, but that's important. And crucially, they're a long-term investment. All of these people, all these collaborators, all these people that you'll find opportunities to work with, they're all people who you will keep working with again and again. I don't think I've worked with anyone once yet. I always bring back people, even if someone doesn't work on one project, I'll bring them back for the next. You build up this network of really talented, awesome people who you can then bring in and have work on the next game, which is really cool. So next door, they're talking about Twitch. I think there's a Twitch talk right now, and this is sort of the Twitch slide. But it's not the Twitch slide, because the problem with the Twitch slide is it's all old data. It's exactly what I said earlier, the information that you see at conferences is usually out of date. So anytime you see someone talking about their amazing approach they took to Twitch, they're probably talking about something that happened 6 months to a year ago, right? And we all know that online culture moves far too quickly. And if you try and do the exact thing that that person did way back when, it won't work. Because you're going to be the second person, or more than likely the 100th person to try that technique. So this is something a bit more general. This is the idea that we always need to be looking for those PR opportunities in the places that no one's looking yet. This becomes about keeping your ear to the ground and paying attention to online culture. You're looking for these places where millions of people are getting information and no one's talking to them yet. And Twitch was great for that. Twitch was an amazing place where loads of people were going on Twitch, and they still are, in fairness. Twitch is still a very good place to talk about your game. But, we'll see that decline eventually. YouTubers, I've talked before about, the massive support that people like Total Biscuit gave Thomas Was Alone, and how that kind of allowed that game to do very well. But we're seeing YouTubers have less and less of an effect now. So really it's about paying attention and waiting for the cool opportunity that you see when you see it, because these opportunities to speak to millions of people and not have to pay money to do it are what makes these indie games do really well. And no one at any conference is ever going to tell you how to do that, because the techniques they know are old and kind of useless. You can still use them, and in many cases they will still have an effect, but you want to be the person who's speaking at the next conference about the cool idea you came up with, and that just involves paying attention to nerd culture, and specifically the culture around the kind of game that you're making. Fair prices. So another observation I've got right now around pricing, we're seeing a lot of people basically dive to the bottom with pricing on console and on PC. And that worries me massively because we saw this on mobile and it has a bad effect because it lowers the expected price. The thing that really worries me about it though is unlike mobile, it's not working. On mobile it happened, and it happened because it worked. People kept jumping their prices down and they kept making more money. But the reality is on Steam, if you see a game launch at $5, that game's not doing amazingly well. And I think that's specific to the PC audience and the console audience, is that we've done an amazing job over the last 5 years or so of explaining the concept of variable pricing to them. That audience knows, they know that any game that comes out has a starting price. And that starting price is going to slowly decrease over time, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, and eventually they're going to be able to get it for like 20 cents. And at that point, as a player, it's always about where do you want to pay on that spectrum? What's the point going to be that you jump in and pick up the game? You know, in my case, you know, something like, say, Uncharted 4, I want to play it sat next to my TV at home. I want to play that game because I want to have an opinion on the internet about it. And everyone knows opinions don't matter more than 2 weeks after a game's come out. So I need to play that game straight away so I can be down the pub with my mates and talk about it. But there are other games that it's like, yeah, I'll play that at some point. Maybe I won't. Or maybe I'll see it in a sale for $5. The problem is if you start your game at $5 or even lower, that's the first price. And then it's going to decrease from there, rather than if you released it at $20 or $30, you've got a much longer curve. And the biggest problem with $5 launches is that you're making a statement about your game to the audience. You're saying this game isn't very good. Anyone who buys digital games on console or PC, when you see a game launch at a very low price, your assumption is it's not a very good game. It doesn't mean you should overprice your game, but you should choose a price that makes sense for what your game is and what value you think will be associated by the audience. Obviously, you might still get it wrong, but you shouldn't undervalue the price you're charging for people. Honest crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a weird one. Crowdfunding is something that I'm less qualified to talk about than anything else I'm talking about during this talk. And there are things I'm very much not qualified to talk about. Crowdfunding, we did a bit for Thomas Was Alone. But crowdfunding is in a really weird place right now. I see a lot of people who I think are trying to have successful crowdfunding campaigns rather than successful video games. And what I mean by that is that they're not asking for the money that they need. They're not asking for the amount of money that actually suits the kind of game that they want to make. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think the obvious one is ignorance, right? Is they don't know how much a game costs. Maybe it's their first game, or they've not made a game like that before. And they don't really know how much that game's going to cost. And to that I'd say, go and ask. Go and find another developer. Ask them their opinion on how much their games cost. Someone that made something similar to your game. Get advice, get feedback, get information. There's a lot of us out there and we all want to talk. The one thing I would say is be careful about region, about where that person's from. You know, I was in Croatia a couple of weeks ago talking to a dev who's making a really beautiful game. And I asked them how much they thought their game was going to cost. And it was roughly a third of what it would cost me to make the same game because they work in Croatia and I work in the UK. And just the cost of living is different. So bear that in mind, but try and get those answers. I think another reason people probably under-request is the desire to get some money, right? We've all been there. You know, we've had either very little money or no money, and you just need some cash now to keep making your game. But that's really risky. That's super dangerous. That can result in you bringing out a game and massively disappointing an audience, which is not a good way to start your reputation online and kind of to build up an audience for future games. And I guess the final one is this idea of courting publishers, is this idea that you ask for a small amount of money, maybe you get like a bit more than that, and then a publisher sweeps in. And the problem there is that it massively underestimates how these deals have worked in the past. You know, you've heard of these Kickstarters that have then got publisher support. I would say in 90% of those situations, the publisher was there before the crowdfund started. They were in the wings, they had a contract in place, they had a deal in place, to back the project if it got through the crowdfunding process. They didn't go out and find that publisher after the fact. The reason being that if you do this model and you do crowdfund a small amount and then try and get a publisher, if you don't get a publisher, you're back in exactly the same position as you were before, where you don't have the money to make the game you want to make. Crowdfunding seems on the decline in games right now, but like everything else in this talk, all it'll take is one project, one high-profile developer to have a successful Kickstarter campaign, and then we'll all be talking about how it's the only way to fund games again. Oh, don't mess up on social media. I'm going to save the translator of that word. Don't mess up on social media. I'm kind of quite vocal on the internet. Does anyone in the room follow me on Twitter? I'm not very interesting. Oh, a few of you do. Okay, that's cool. So I'm quite chatty and I talk a lot. And it was something that when, back in kind of 2011, 2012, when I was making my start, the common consensus was you have to be on social media. Talk on Twitter all the time. Have opinions on everything. And that's, now it seems very naive. That was kind of foolish of all of us. And we did it and it promoted our games and it got people talking about us. And we kind of sold this story of the cool, hip indie developer. But I don't think in 2016 that's necessarily still the case. There's a lot of very successful and good indie games that have come out in the last couple of years. I have no idea who made them. A lot more people in this room had heard of Thomas Was Alone than had heard of me. That's not a coincidence. That's just the way I think games are played now, is that the personality behind the game matters less than it did when a lot of us got our start. And I still see this advice circulating of like, be sociable, be big on social media. And that, while I think it probably helps, it's probably a cool thing and probably can get you contacts with journalists or whatever, I think it actually opens you up to some massive negativity. It's very tricky to be public online. It's very tiring. You get a lot of people hate you, which can be frustrating and a bit stressful. I'm not sure it's as essential as it used to be, and I think the opportunity is there to really mess it up, right? We've all seen a friend on Facebook, drunk, say something stupid, and kind of cause a fight with their family or whatever. Doing that with tens of thousands of people watching, I've seen that as well. It's not pretty, and especially if you're working with a team, it can have a really negative effect on the team. Asking for help, this is in the pile of things I hear people saying at conferences. So I walk around conferences. One of my favorite things to do at conferences is to kind of join conversations amongst kind of indies starting out and just like listen to how things are going for them and what the situation is. And something I hear way too much will be a group of indies sit around in a circle, and one of them will turn to the other and say, have you got a publisher? And the other one will go, no. Of course not. I'm cool. I'm like those indies from 2011, 2012. I'm like Phil Fish, or I'm like Mike Bithell. And they don't usually say Mike Bithell. If I do a little cheer. They say I want to be like those devs in Indie Game the Movie, and I want to, be cool and not have a publisher. And I get it. Being an artist is cool, but at the same time, this is something that very rarely has happened in the past. Most of the people you think made their games entirely self-funded didn't. I'm not going to name names. I will say that most people who you've heard of had a publisher. In my case, I had Sony as a platform holder were very supportive and kind of promoting my game. People who have investors. There is this perception that lots of indie games are made just entirely from one person's bank account, and that is not the case. And you don't need to hold yourself to that ridiculous ideal that other people aren't holding themselves to. And it's something you can avoid. The great thing about these publishers and investors is it shares the risk. If you're making a game, and you're probably making a game for a pretty significant amount of money if there's a few of you, losing that money if your game doesn't do well could be disastrous. It could stop you in your tracks. By getting a publisher, by getting support, you don't risk it all on one game. You could flop a game. It's what we all dread, and it happens to everyone at some point. So be prepared for it, and a publisher's a great way of doing that. And they're prepared to do that as well because they have lots of games, which means they can take lots of risks. You're one of those risks. Let them take the risk. It'll work in your favor. They can also do all the boring stuff, which we all forget about. Things like localization, things like QA, really important stuff, but massively dull stuff. The bureaucracy of platform holders, doing forms and metadata, and all this additional work that we always have to do to get a game out the door. Let someone else do it. And also, crucially, there is this generation of developers who have had some success in the past, who are now able to help out other devs. So go to them, be that advice, be that introducing you to a specific YouTuber or a game journalist that you want to cover your game, or in many cases funding. We're doing some stuff where we're kind of financially helping a couple of our friends out. There are these opportunities to go to other more established devs and get support and help. So ask around in your local kind of networks and find out if there are people who know that stuff. The arms race kicking in. So it sounds a lot in this talk like I go around listening to people's conversations a lot, and I apologize. But another conversation I always listen in on is on Twitter. Obviously, I have like searches set up for my game so I can see what people are saying about it. And every day, I swear this happens every day, a developer will put up a screenshot of their game, not looking great, like kind of looking ugly, and saying, oh, this game, it's not working, I need to get an artist. I need to get some help, this isn't good. And some smart ass will jump in and say, do Thomas Was Alone. Do rectangles. So Thomas Was Alone was just about rectangles, very simple visuals. And the smart ass always suggests, just do rectangles. It worked for him. I'm the him in that scenario, I think. And it did work for him. But I don't think it would nowadays. I don't think you could make Thomas Was Alone now and kind of have success. I think Thomas Was Alone did well because back then you could make a game about rectangles and be on the front page of Steam for a week and a half or 2 weeks or whatever it was. You could get that kind of exposure from out of nowhere. That's not the world anymore. And likewise, the expectations from players of how deep games should be, or how visually interesting games should be, or how original games should be, these things are much, much more essential than they used to be. They used to be, it used to be really easy. I hate being that guy who comes on stage and goes, oh, back in my day it was brilliant. But it was. And now it's trickier. And we need to acknowledge that. Originality seems to be crucial to this. Games that are good don't seem to be doing very well anymore. It seems to be that you have to genuinely be creating something original and fresh that no one's played before. That goes back to not trying to duplicate someone else's success. Players as well cannot see the difference between a small company making a small game and one of these bigger companies making a small game. To them, it's all the same. And that's a good thing in a way. Like it makes us all strive to compete with each other and make better work. But we are competing with Ubisoft making a small game. We are competing with these big companies. And we need to be aware of that. Likewise, we need to be aware that we're competing with indies worldwide. This is a big problem amongst, I've seen this in the UK, is we have a really great local independent development scene. Lots of indies making cool games. But they're competing with each other. They're competing to be the best UK indie. And that holds them back because they're only competing with a very small pool of people. The reality is, you should be one of the best people in your local area because the rest of the world is making games as well. And you need to be as good or better than those people. And if you're not competing on that level, if you're thinking of yourself just as a developer from country X, rather than a developer who's making games for a worldwide audience, you are holding yourself back. Good for a game from a specific country is not good enough. And it's something that we all need to bear in mind, and we all need to compete on that level in order to have a chance. And there is an international opportunity. Now, this is a talk I do in lots of different countries. So in Russia, I don't need to tell you all to do an English translation, I'm assuming. I guess you probably know that. But when I go to countries that are English native speakers, it doesn't occur to them to do localization. It doesn't occur to them.
Потому что им кажется, что это те страны, которые
Really lazy in English-speaking countries. I only speak English, it's embarrassing, and that's kind of the norm. So I do talk about this. I do talk about this idea that we all need to be localizing. It used to be that you would do e-figs, which is English, French, Italian, German, Spanish. That's no longer the case. We've also got Polish and Russian translations in volume right now. Russia is weirdly one of the biggest places for us with volume. It's doing really well in Russia. And if we hadn't localized it, I'm sure that wouldn't be the case. If you're thinking about bringing your game out, you need to be thinking about this stuff. If you're doing English and Russian, that's actually a really good split of languages. I'd throw in Polish and I'd throw in German. And maybe Spanish. I wouldn't bother with Italian or French probably, but like, go for it, why not? We're also doing Chinese and Japanese versions of volume right now. And I want to do a talk at some point about like the Chinese process, because releasing a game in China is really tough. So that's going to, once we've actually successfully done it, I look forward to talking about that on a stage. Another aspect of this is lifetime extension. So with your game, it's not the reality that a game makes most of its money in that first month anymore. It really isn't. It's a very old-fashioned approach. You know, it comes from when we used to sell games in shops. You would have your shelf time, and that would be where you made your money. That's not the reality anymore. All of my games have made decent money at the start, and then just trundled along. You know, Thomas Was Alone is in its 4th year now. It's nearly at 4 years, and it still sells pretty comfortably every day. And the reason for that is that we keep finding new ways to bring it out, be it new localizations, new platforms. Thomas Was Alone is on everything, I think, except for Nintendo 3DS. We'll get to that at some point, I'm sure. And I plan to release it on every future games console, just for fun. Because it's a rectangles game and that brings me pleasure. And then the last thing I kind of want to point out before coming to Q&A, so start thinking about questions so we don't have that awkward wait for questions, is the Useful Businessperson. This is something that a lot of the more established indies are starting to do or have done, and I think is going to be something that everyone who's making games themselves needs to be thinking about, which is the Useful Businessperson. I don't know about, I assume this room is a lot of developers probably in here, like myself. I really like making computer games. I like programming, I like designing, I like all that stuff. Not so good with accounting, or the bureaucracy and noisiness of business stuff, doing contracts, talking to my lawyers. And I do actually have multiple lawyers now, which is awesome, and I'm always really proud of it. It's two, but it's still technically lawyers. So, what I found really useful is about a year ago, I made the decision to bring in a business partner who is just a nerd for business. Like, that's his whole thing. He loves Excel, all that really boring stuff, that's his thing. And what that means is I don't have to do that stuff anymore. I get to make computer games, which is a much better job. I don't know how I talked him into it. But it's not just me. It's most established indies I know. Suddenly, a man or woman in a suit appeared next to them about 6 months ago, and it seems to be creeping through the industry. So if you are making your first games, you probably don't need someone like that now, yet. Maybe you do, but you probably don't. But start thinking about it. Start looking around your group of friends. Who's always got money in their bank account? Who's never in their overdraft? Who's like the person who organizes the bus or the taxi or the whatever? Who's the adult in your group of friends? Because that person might be someone who in a few years' time you want to kind of get involved in organizing your Chinese release. Or doing boxed versions of your game in the US or whatever. It's a really useful person to start thinking about now. And it works. I'm sorry, my voice is properly going now. Let me just jump back in here. because it opens up opportunities and it allows you to keep working on the stuff you want to keep working on. And they're brilliant as a counterweight. One thing that does happen as you achieve some level of success is that you get surrounded by like people who pretend you're really clever, like yes men and people who will like tell you you're a genius. And I've seen this happen to so many of my friends, and it's the worst thing because you make awful video games at that point because everyone's telling you you're really clever all the time. So having people around you who will tell you you're an idiot, because you probably are, we all are, is really useful and is something that will make your games better going on. It's exactly the same as hiring an artist or an animator or anyone. Hire a business person is my last tip. So yeah, thank you for your time. If you're on Twitter, that's my Twitter name. I'm awful on Twitter. I talk too much. I'm generally quite dull. But yeah, I kind of rattled through it, and I've got a cold, so my voice, I'm sure, is very annoying. Thank you for your time. Let's do some Q&A, some questions. Put your hand up, I guess, if you have a question, and someone will run over. Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you. I think I overdid the bow. Yes, I'm going to pop this back. Hello.
Hello, my name is Sergey. Thank you for the talk. First of all, your voice is perfectly fine.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind of you. No one's ever said that to me before.
I'm the first. So I would like to ask you about maybe, I don't know actually, maybe you've done something with, you know this feeling when you have a question in your head and when you're about to ask it, it just disappears from your head?
It's horrible, isn't it?
Yes, it is. What is the name of competition game jam that everybody internationally doing?
There's a bunch of game jams in general, but there's lots of them, yeah.
Yeah, the one, the biggest one.
Ludum Dare?
Yes, Ludum Dare. Thank you. That's possible.
Yeah.
So, have you had any experience with Ludum Dare? What do you think this role today, and how it was yesterday? And do you think it is still important to do it? And do you have to monitor it and stuff like this? I
like
opinion on this.
I like game jams. I think that's the first one. I won't like specific ones. There's so many that I'll just talk generally. They are really cool. For people in the audience who don't know, game jam, you gather up with a bunch of friends or complete strangers for 24 to 48 hours and you make a game together. And it's really cool. I like it. I think it's something that is cool as a practice and as a way of kind of seeing if you want to work with people, because like you can find a collaborator who you think's really awesome and go, okay, I'm gonna do a game jam with this person and see if they're good and see if I can get on with them. I do think though that you shouldn't just do game jams. There's definitely a lot of young devs I've encountered who've just made lots and lots of game jams, because I think it's really important to learn how to finish a game, to polish a game, to put like a settings screen on the game, like all the really like less exciting stuff. Game jams are great because they're the fun bit of game development where you're finding out like what the hell the game is. Whereas, yeah, if you, I think they're part of a healthy diet. It's like cake. Cake is great. And it's a lovely way of celebrating and having a good time, but you don't want to eat cake all the time. I eat more than I should. You don't want to eat all the time though, so I think it's a thing to do, but I wouldn't say it should be the focus. That said, Thomas Was Alone was a game jam that I then just kind of continued on. So it's a great way of originating prototypes and ideas for games. Who's next? Oh,
thank you for the talk.
Did you bring your own microphone, or was?
Yes,
that's amazing.
I'm prepared.
That was super fast. That's awesome.
So what I wanted to ask, you mentioned VR games. What do you think more? Can you tell more about what you're thinking? What's it's getting more trend, the VR games, and also thinking about making maybe a VR game. What do you think about them?
What do I think about VR? I love VR. I'm a proper nerd for it. My living room is just VR now. Like, well, I haven't, like, no, that makes it sound like I just have a blank room. It's not a blank room, but it like has like Vive and Oculus and the PlayStation VR and all that stuff. And we're making a PlayStation VR game right now, but we're also prototyping a bunch of different things. I love VR. I think it's really cool. what I like about it is that we have no idea what works yet. Like, we're all experimenting and sharing ideas, and there are people who want to rush to kind of go, well, VR games have to be like this. And it's like, guys, it's not, you know, no one's played it yet. It's not known. And that's exciting, because it's kind of, as a designer, there's a lot of opportunity to just do whatever. And obviously, most of it will be awful. As is usually the case when you're experimenting. Like, most of it we'll hate and we'll look back at and just go, what were we thinking? But no, it's exciting. In terms of the business side, right now we don't know if this thing's going to take off. We don't know if the audience is going to buy it. And if they buy it, how many games are they going to buy? And how many games are they going to buy in a specific genre? Like, we just don't know anything about PlayStation VR, about Oculus, about Vive. So right now, I think it's a fun thing to experiment with. There's investment, there's opportunities to get other people, platform holders especially, to fund your game, if it's an interesting idea. But I wouldn't risk a company on it yet. So yeah, we're doing a PSVR title. We're doing a DLC for Volume that uses PSVR. And we're experimenting with some other prototypes, and we'll see if any of them kind of get good.
We got a question on the left.
It's nice that all the people with questions gathered right at the front, isn't it? That's making this process a lot easier. It's good. Hello.
Hello. А меня переведет кто-нибудь?
Я переведу.
Sorry.
Will anybody translate me? Thank you very much for presentation. I have the following question. In your game, the main hero is just a square. Well, when you've been creating it, you've been looking at other games and you've seen that instead of this square, in other games, they have very cool hero, with good details. How you've been fighting against it, and how difficult was it to you just simply make a game with a square?
All right, so the question is, in Thomas Was Alone, the character is, you know, just the shape, right? When you were developing that and saw all of these other games with more detailed characters with animations, how did you deal with that? Like, you know,
Do you not like my game? No, joking, I'm joking. Yeah, honestly, I dealt with it because I had to deal with it, because I had no money. Or like I had to just get them. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Don't applaud the lack of money. You're literally applauding poverty right now.
we've all been there.
Well, that's it, right? Every dev's been there. So it was a reality of, okay, I need to make a video game. I was working at a game studio back then. This was kind of my hobby, kind of evenings and weekends. I was working on this game. I knew I wanted to make it. I kind of didn't like my job, so this was the escape thing. And it was like, okay, I can't afford an artist. But fortunately, I was a graphic designer when I was younger, so I knew I could make rectangles look good. Like, I could align things so that it looked okay, like just layout stuff. And the original plan was to have just these rectangles, and they weren't going to have characters. It was going to be like Tetris, like just blocks. And then I realized, no, there has to be like a story. So I wrote a story, and it was just going to be text. And then I was like, this is awful. No one's going to care. So I got a voice actor, and I crowdfunded $2,000, which was the most amazing amount of money I could imagine. And I paid for a voice actor to do the narration. And I guess, I guess the writing was good enough. That was I sat down and wrote this thing. And for whatever reason, something in it seems to have worked for people. And then Danny, who's the actor, came in and just added so much personality to that script. He won awards for it, and rightly so. And it just kind of happened. But this is the thing I said right at the start of the talk. People, if you have success, Thomas Was Alone, I think, is nearly 2 million copies sold now. People go, wow, what a clever plan that guy had to make a rectangle game and sell 2 million copies. What a genius. And the reality is, I had no idea, because no one ever has any idea. This is a massively risky dangerous, difficult industry, and I'm just the lucky bastard that got lucky, and you know, somehow I've managed to do it now with 2 games. Next game, probably everyone will hate. So there you go. That's that. Any more questions?
We have a little bit of time for a few more questions, and
Let's
then
do it.
I'll
I'm gonna sit on the
ask you-
sofa. It's cool.
Yeah, go for it. Lay down.
Lay down, you think?
Make yourself comfortable.
Hello. No, that's
Hello.
massively embarrassing. Hello.
Thank you for the talk.
It's kind of sexy.
Thank you.
No, it's not. I wanted to ask about the publicity. What do you think are the best ways to gain publicity for a small indie game right now? I know you talked about going where no one is right now.
I gave a lot of vague.
Yes,
yeah.
but something that works right now. Something that, in addition to going where no one is, I should go somewhere where someone is, right?
Yeah. So
What are the good ways right now? Not when you were publishing your first game, but
I hear
right
what you're
now.
saying.
Mhm.
I hear what you're saying. What I think is interesting is I think I still think that sharing, if your game's nearly fit or like in a good point, if it looks great, video seems to be. I mean, video's massive everywhere, but like I'm seeing a lot of. I follow on Twitter a bunch of devs who are making like their first games, and they're putting up like animated GIFs and videos and kind of showing kind of really cool gameplay stuff, and that seems to be working because I see, you know, people retweeting it, journalists kind of getting interested, and the key thing to remember is that everyone feeds everyone. So, you know, a lot of people don't read games websites anymore. That's fair enough. But most of the YouTubers read games websites. So if you can get on the games website, the YouTuber will hear about you, and they'll make a video, and then the streamer will hear about it. So honestly, I do everything. If I was you, if you've got your games nearly done or whatever, get video, animated GIFs, make your game, I mean, memes are a really interesting thing, right? Everyone, listen to me though. I'm not gonna anger Jim Sterling. Memes are this idea that you can, of an idea being expressed very quickly, right? And usually people use memes to express really stupid ideas, right? There's a specific dog or something that they think is really cool. But the idea of memes, the idea of compacting an idea into like 5 seconds, that's how people are consuming stuff right now. So if you can make an animated GIF or an image or something or a very short video, like a 5-second video, that people go, oh, that, and you can be that game, that can work really well right now, it seems. There's a bunch of them right now. There's one called Manifold Garden, which is this kind of impossible Escher style space, and the guy just made an animated GIF of like panning through this weird world, and the next bloody month I saw it in magazines and stuff, just because he made something that expressed that idea succinctly. I'm not saying put memes in your game. I'm saying make your game into something that I can tell my friend about in like 2 words or a sentence, or I can send them one image and blow them away. Because we're all very lazy with sharing information right now, so making something that can very quickly be communicated seems to be the best for the next 2 weeks. And then everyone will want essays, I don't know. So yeah, just that would be my, if I were trying to promote something right now, that's what I'd do.
In the interest of time, I'm just going to ask the final question here.
Sure.
So you mentioned that Thomas Was Alone released everywhere. Like we've seen it on many
Too many
platforms.
places.
What would you say would be the best like secondary platform for you guys after the initial release, and why do you think that?
Sorry, I need to cough, so I'm just gonna. That didn't help at all. These are really good microphones.
Do you want some water?
Say again?
Do you want some water?
I'm gonna get some water. So the question was, what was the best secondary platform? It's weird because everything has done something. So we released Thomas on PC initially, because that's where everyone releases their game initially, 'cause it's really easy. PlayStation was big for us because PlayStation got very excited about the game. We released it on Vita. Everyone remembers Vita, right? I shouldn't make jokes because Volume's doing weirdly well on Vita right now. But we came out on a console that Sony was putting a lot of effort and energy into trying to kind of put content on, so they really heavily promoted Thomas, and that made us a real game, which was helpful. I think as well, though, weirdly, iPad was for Thomas, because it suddenly became something that like parents gave their 3-year-old. to shut them up, which is weird. I get sent. It is kind of a weird thing getting sent photos of people's children, like playing your game and stuff. It's kind of creepy. But yeah, so that opened it to a new audience. So I would say it's a compound thing. It's just every platform seems to have scaled up to the extent that now I release on platforms as a joke. We released it on Xbox One. And if you've not heard of Thomas Was Alone, Google it after this and look at what Thomas Was Alone looks like. We put it on Xbox One, it sold really well, because I think people just were laughing as they clicked by. Like, why would you release this on here? The number of times people tweet at me, like, I own 6 copies of your game. I don't know how that happened, and I think it's bundles, it's whatever. But yeah, with Thomas, we just rode a wave. And with Volume, we're planning to, I guess, probably do the same thing over time as well.
All right, thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. Cool.
Okay,